Welcome to the Pregnancy Help Podcast. I'm Christine Grimmett, and I'm joined today by Lisa Bourne, Managing Editor of Pregnancy Help News, Andrea Trudden, Vice President of Communications and Marketing, and Darrell Goudsey, the President of Heartbeat International. And in this episode, we're covering some of the most notable moments in the first 100 days of the new Trump administration, specifically as it relates to the pregnancy help movement. And you can read about many of these highlights and other pregnancy help news at pregnancyhelpnews.com. Well, thank you everyone for joining in this discussion today. There's been a lot going on in these past 100 days, so let's jump in.
Wow, I felt like there was 100 days in the first 5 days of the Trump administration personally. There was is it Clinton that talks about the energy of the executive, right? That there's something in the Federal's Papers that talks about the energy of the executive. And in those first few days, first couple of weeks, we saw a lot of energy, a lot of executive orders, a lot of things that really developed quickly. Some of those early wins, Lisa, some of those early wins were things that are very familiar in the back and forth between a Democrat administration and a Republican administration, at least as we've known them over the last few. We saw early wins, such as with the Hyde Amendment, Mexico City policy. Lisa, you wrote on those in particular.
Yeah, one part about those is very often they can be considered like a volleyball with the different administrations. They'll go back and forth, but the hope would be that there'd be some more staying power with them this time around, and certainly also with the Geneva Consensus Declaration. Those were just three of the major milestones in the first week, but like you said, our heads were kind of spinning. There's a list and you could just read the list and take up a bunch of time. So that was really just the beginning. Out of the gate, he seemed to really hit it, certainly in our issue, but in many issues. And it was like we said, it was just the beginning. But those, Heartbeat International is, like the name says, international. So we watch everything that comes out of Washington, whether it pertains to simply the U.S. or overseas as well. And those, the Hyde is here, the Hyde Amendment is here, but then Mexico City policy and Geneva Consensus Declaration affect folks overseas as well. Very, very important, all of them.
It's good to remember because when we think as far as the U.S. centers are concerned and U.S. pro-life mindset, the Hyde Amendment is key. The Mexico City policy really is far more impacting of our international friends. And if we remember from the first, Trump 45, as some would say, that first go around is he actually ratcheted up the Mexico City policy. He strengthened it. He made it much stronger when he enacted it initially. And the good news is we've returned to that. Not all of the things we're seeing in the Trump administration is good news relative to a pro-life perspective, but much of it still is. So those early wins, Hyde Amendment, Mexico City, even since then, Andrew, we've seen some developments amongst our I won't say our friends, amongst the folks at Planned Parenthood. They've been under fire, in particular fire, actually, in of all places in New York City, but also coming from another New York-based effort, the New York Times.
Yeah, it was very interesting to see, and I don't know that any of us had New York Times blasting the Planned Parenthood on our bingo card for 2025, but that definitely was in the news not long after the new administration took over, calling out various Planned Parenthoods and based on their staff and ex-staff reporting about treatment that they were given, low pay, calling out the fact that Planned Parenthood National was spending all of this money on elections and not caring for their affiliate locations actually serving women and men. That was very unexpected. Something that, of course, we hear anecdotally, but the fact that the New York Times actually wrote an entire piece, and I believe it was front page of the New York Times that weekend, that shows some things happening culturally, where it was seen for years they were just off limits, and anything that was in the news about Planned Parenthood was always from a positive angle. They were always given softball questions, if you will, and not the hard-hitting investigations and reports that we so often see on our side for pregnancy help, be it true or not. But they were asking those hard questions and publishing it. So kudos to the New York Times, which I don't say that often, but they
Well,
did a very
hold on.
oh,
I'm not convinced. I'm a little skeptical. Call me skeptical of the New York Times and this, where maybe they were really running cover for them, showing like, okay, because the next thing that we heard was they're actually closing the Manhattan office, which is like their flagship office. Used to be called the Margaret Sanger office, right after a well-known eugenicist. They finally began to had enough flack from that they had to own that and remove Margaret Sanger from that. But they've actually closed, which was their at one time was their flagship office, and even a few others. So I'm wondering if the New York Times really, in a sense, wasn't cover for it, because frankly, I don't think Planned Parenthood is really exercised about closing physical locations in the light of chemical abortion becoming a predominant tool of their both their ideology and their business model.
well, and that opens a door for us to have a different discussion, because we do know that as brick and mortar buildings are closing, it's all documented. The number of virtual abortion clinics has risen by 220 in the past 2 years. That is reported. And so that is something that we definitely are keeping our eyes on, because while the doors are closing, the number of abortions in the nation have been continuously rising to the fact that it was the highest it has been in more than a decade, just in 2024 alone. So yes, you are right. It could be New York Times reading the tea leaves and figuring out ways to kind of cover their backs, to be like, oh, no, we've always told the truth about everything, and we're sorry, my snark is coming out. But it may definitely be them running cover. But the fact that they did it, again, goes to that cultural shift of they are admitting that something is wrong, and they actually put it out there, which was, again, not celebrating them, but rather acknowledging the fact that something was so blatant that they couldn't ignore it any longer. So they did actually put it out there. And you're right, several different brick and mortars have been closing, but along the way, we have been seeing more apps pop up. We've seen more commercials for various brands of who knows where these virtual clinics are, but we do know that Planned Parenthood is a part of that telehealth abortion model. And it is something that we are continuing to watch, even as our pregnancy help organizations continue to expand into that telecare world to help meet the women's needs in this immediate cultural time that we live in.
Some of this would be responsive to the administration going after the Planned Parenthood dollars. Now they've done that in kind of meager steps. You know, it was a big headline, but if you really look at the numbers, it's a million here, a million there. It's not huge dollars, because after all they've been recipients of, upwards of $500 million. Which in government talk, what they like to say is, billion here, billion there. Pretty soon it adds up to real money, right? That's the way the government speaks. Where you and I in our ministries and missions, when we start talking in millions of dollars, you're talking big money. But for the politicos, that's not really the case. Lisa, you've been watching that very closely.
So yeah, the Planned Parenthood locations may be closing, but the question really is are the abortion numbers going down, and is the amount of funding that Planned Parenthood and other abortion providers get going down, or how about federal funding overall? Because some of the other work that the administration has been doing is to stop federal funding through the government itself, reimbursing travel expenses for abortions for the Department of Defense. They've been working to stop Department of Veterans Affairs from allowing VA hospitals to perform abortions, and stop the Department of Health and Human Services from paying for abortions. Those are also in those first 100-day accomplishments. So that's another way that we can, applaud, if we will, the first 100 days of the Trump administration. So, the funding thing isn't just going into Planned Parenthood's coffers. It's our dollars, our hard-earned dollars, going toward it one way or the other. And that's just adding insult to injury for the average citizen who's pro-life. I mean, we don't want to see abortion, but we certainly don't want to be paying for it and being forced to pay for it. So that's another feather in the cap. But we have to keep after the administration and Congress in both areas, I would say, from defunding abortion providers, and then also making sure that the government is not paying for abortion as well.
That's a success. Thank you for pointing that out. That's a success within the first 100 days. Is the Trump administration, Trump 47's administration, really reversing the Biden administration effort? Because this is what is so often. I know the people that I talk to at church and those who are in the kind of they're in the pro-life, they're pro-life, but they're not in the pro-life movement per se. So they wouldn't really know that Biden did everything he could to try to get the government to pay for abortion. Like he was dangling if indeed it was Biden, right? That's still a question. The administration did everything they could to try to hand money over to the abortion industry, right? In all of these forms, Lisa, that you called out, in the Department of Defense, in the travel monies, in our efforts outside of the country, our international spending. So these are all good wins that we can point to, no matter how they're coming to us. We'll take them. They're small on the scheme of things as far as abortion funding from the government, but they're important as far as directives within our own government. So that's a good reminder. Thanks for bringing that up. That does lead me to someone that can make a big difference in the landscape is who the head of the FDA is. And in those first couple of weeks, we were excited about some announcements. We had some good gains in that area. So the head of the FDA was confirmed and is now in action. That was Dr. McCary. It was probably our most watched person. The other one would be the CDC. That was a loss. We lost Dave Weldon in that. We had a really solid pro-lifer for which the Weldon Amendment was a factor. We lost that. That had to be withdrawn. So we'll wait and see who the CDC person will be. But McCary has been a particularly positive thing. We know that he's open. He's verbally stated, as did HHS Secretary Kennedy, said, "I'm open to reviewing the data and the information," because that's been our big bugaboo, is that the FDA has just been running really roughshod over any realistic reins being pulled back on the abortion pill. They've been running in the other direction. So hopefully we'll see some positive steps as we see some new developments there. Anything from the confirmation conversation that we want to add?
I do recall RFK saying that President Trump had asked him to study the safety of the abortion pill, and that they both had an interest in that. So that's heartening.
Yeah, in fact, there was a statement that was made that Kennedy curiously made a statement: every abortion is a tragedy, which we totally agree with. It's very interesting to hear that coming from someone who's been almost stridently, pro-abortion in their language for many years, and so that's very good to hear. We hope that holds true, and that allows someone like a Dr. McCary and others at least a positive room to make good changes. We're very hopeful of where that could lead as far as REMS for in particular the abortion pill. Yeah, but that's also led to some of our life states responding, right? It's only been 100 days. There are positives maybe yet to come from the Trump administration, but that's really encouraged and allowed room for some of our life states to make changes. Wouldn't you agree, Andrea?
Yeah, that's been something that has been consistent with President Trump for many years at this point, since the Dobbs decision was made, to really reiterate, it goes back to the states. It's up to the states. And that's been something that we have then seen the states enact in various ways. We've talked about it over the past couple of years, but what we're seeing is more and more encouraging laws being implemented in life states that are allowing funding for pregnancy help organizations to serve the women and communities that they're in. We're seeing more outreach in regard to providing alternatives to abortion within those states, because they do understand that if we are looking to, within the various states, set up protections and limit abortion in one way or another, we have to have answers for these women and men as well. So we are hearing more about pro-family bills that are being introduced, encouraged, finding different ways that the administration is just talking right now. We haven't seen them implement anything, but we're hearing the chatter of different ways that they can encourage motherhood, encourage marriage. And that's all very promising, because we do know that when we have strong families, that encourages a culture of life. It makes healthy children. Just statistically, the studies show with a mother and a father in a home raising a child, they tend to have more grounding and live healthier, more successful lives when they have that full family unit, which is why we encourage that within this movement. And to see the life states and those who are in the in the House or Senate within the various states introducing such legislature is very encouraging.
Well, that's been research that's been available for actually a number of years, right? Charles Murray came out, he really talked about really two paths. There are those that are flourishing, and then there are those that are fracturing. Those are his terms. So Charles Murray is a professor of sociology, I believe, or he's been really immersed in the social science of it, the actual science, right? Not the fuzzy stuff, but really talking about how there's a big difference depending upon what environment they're in. Is it an environment that allows for flourishing, which is what you're leaning into? Or the reverse, is it one that's really oriented towards fracturing? And that's where we see, it feels like the policies of the progressive left have been about intentionally fracturing the family versus creating environments for flourishing. Murray was the one who introduced us to the success sequence, or Murray was one of the first to kind of popularize that as a reality. Like, hey, if you sequence these things properly, right? First, babies happen within marriage happen, education, marriage, babies, right? That's the success sequence, but it seems like progressive politics wants to reorder those things despite what they produce, which we've seen in fracturing. All right. So we that's a good call out as far as life states, but the abortion states have been responding in a different way. Lisa, you've written on some of this. You've seen some of this happening in some of the reporting that you've been monitoring. Speak to us on what the abortion states are doing.
Well, they've seemingly become more emboldened at all levels, whether that be AGs or other lawmakers coming at pregnancy health organizations any way they can, whether that be public smear campaigns or legislation or legal action. But we're also seeing things where they're trying to traffic abortion, if you will, across state lines. With that ubiquitousness of the chemical abortion pill being able to be delivered one way or another, without the use of a brick and mortar location. So I know that there was one state that was giving cover to abortionists that were going to be prescribing across state lines, or I can't remember if it was the same state or a different state, actually, because I think there's more than one state that's having these tendencies that wants to start withholding the identity of doctors that are prescribing. So then that's going to, remove them from any type of accountability for circumventing local laws. Governors saying that our state is a sanctuary state, we welcome you, and in fact, encouraging what we call abortion tourism for people to travel across state lines. There's groups that will fund those trips for women, but then the state's doing whatever they can to welcome them in, and it's really very disheartening to see elected officials go to such lengths to assist women who really are in need and need help and life-affirming choices and support and assistance, to assist them in instead ending the life of their child.
Well, and worse, I mean, shield laws, right?
Right.
We've seen them actually shield abortionists from even things like negligence. That ought to anger for instance, the tort lawyers in those states. But instead, it's the abortion distortion relating to politics, and even the politics of the legal ramifications of negligence. So yeah, that's kind of startling. We saw that in the wake of Dobbs, and that's only ramped up. In some ways, it feels like that's their thumb at Trump, right? That's their thumb at this idea that the Republicans are in control, which we sort of are, right? There's a very thin majority still in Congress. There's a relative pro-life majority in the Senate, although that's a little tenuous in some of these conversations. And then there's this, somewhat of a questionable pro-lifeness as far as the top of the administration, Trump himself, and his things. He's, there's some waffling that's been going on. So we don't have a lot of, I would think, a lot of like solid ground to stand on, but we do have hopeful scenarios that we're leaning into. Probably the biggest thing that's happened well, you wanted to say something, Andrew.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think it's going to ultimately end up in the Supreme Court because we're now seeing these states battling. Because when New York is shielding their doctors and finding ways to completely protect them, even though they're sending abortion pills to Texas or Louisiana and women are being harmed, who is there for that woman? And so they're causing these doctors up in New York who have these shield laws, in other states, of course, but I'm using New York. They are hiding behind these shield laws while harming women. And I'm sorry, that's just very dangerous and needs to be addressed. So unfortunately, I think that they're just going to keep battling it until it gets to the Supreme Court. But hopefully that does come to fruition sooner rather than later so we can get some clarity. Because right now, what is happening, you're right, Jarrell, when you say the abortion distortion, it's ridiculous what people will allow to slide by in the name of abortion, because that's exactly what these state governors and AGs are doing. Is they're hiding any issue that has to do with harming a woman based on abortion simply so that she can continue to access that dangerous drug or procedure.
It's happened at the FDA level as well, right? We've seen them change the equation, change the definitions, change the reporting realities, to where like the only thing that they were really interested under the Biden administration and before that the Obama administration was the worst scenario, which is did a woman die from actually die within 45 days of the abortion. So they so narrowed the definition of the FDA, but they basically just started that. And all of that was exposed in a big way in even the last couple of days of the 100 days of the Trump administration with our friends at the Ethics and Public Policy Commission Council, EPPC. We actually heard from Ryan Anderson at our conference, which was great. But even before he got to us, his team published early in the week, last week, of this what we would say is a groundbreaking revelation, right? Real life studies that exposed really what the FDA was touting, what the Biden administration was showing. I think in its biggest footprint, the FDA studies showed something that related to 30,000 women. But by the time the EPPC report rolls out, it really was talking about studies that related to 845,000 women, something like that, more than 800,000. So studying real life application showed a huge difference from what the FDA was reporting. Lisa, you saw that happening. You reported on that.
Yes, 10 to 11% of women experiencing severe life-threatening complications, which is at least 22 times as high as what the FDA is saying. So that's very
22
significant.
times higher, right? That's key. So it's 0.5%. It was what the FDA was showing us, which is where we get this kind of the silly claims that, well, abortion pill is safer than Tylenol, right? Or whatever, safe and effective. It shows now there's some hidden realities to that. One of which is they're able to report on very controlled clinical environments, right? So when any study, and this is not wrong from a scientific perspective, from this is the kind of under the guise of let's trust the experts, right? So, okay, let's do that. Let's trust the experts on what they say, but in a very controlled clinical way. So this is how they're able to only have very healthy patients in their clinical trials. Got it. And then but then we see how, from a clinical perspective, now being applied to a real world environment. The real world environment is suddenly what we're seeing in the EPC report. Is they're actually looking at how is the abortion pill landing in the real world, right? Which isn't the clinical, controlled, pristine, and aesthetic environment. It's what happens when you put the pill in the real world. And over, I think, 7 or 8 years, we saw that number be 22 times higher. The physical adverse events. We're not talking about the psychologies. That's a whole different conversation. Physical adverse events showing up in our in payer data, right? What insurance payer data, whether it's Medicaid or other insurance, we're seeing huge adverse events that are happening there. So I'm sorry, and Lisa, I interrupted you because that to me was a very compelling point. 22 times higher is showing up in the real world data.
Well, and I'm looking at it from a news perspective. This got a lot of coverage. Mostly friendly media. I saw it in some of the secular, if you will, media. So it's getting good coverage. And of course, the abortion folks are crying foul with it and criticizing it left and right. But the hope is, I think we referenced earlier about that some of the work that the life states were doing, that this will also have a similar wave effect, that it's at least being talked about and it's out there enough that it cannot be ignored while these decisions are being made by the FDA or before the FDA or, some of the court cases and such, because it comes down to how many women is too many or too few to care about being injured or harmed or worse, killed. These women are having to experience the effects of this chemical abortion pill largely alone in their home. We know that many of them are told if they have any type of complication to go to the emergency room and be deceitful and say that they're miscarrying. So that's going to affect their care even further if they're not being upfront with their emergency health providers there about what's going on. And it's just going to let all the numbers further and further be diluted and swept under the rug. And women are who are going to pay the price. And then our wonderful pregnancy health folks, like usual, will be there to pick up the pieces for these women with post-abortive care and any other services and support that they might need.
The study, as I understood, really kind of cut through that the news that the abortion industry wanted to hand the women is like, hey, if you show up in the emergency department, don't tell them the truth. But the actual research was just looking at, did they get mifepristone in the form of the abortion pill, and then what happened to them in the next 45 days, which kind of cuts through what did she tell the emergency department, because then they could really get a real world look at the adverse impact that she had, physical adverse impact. I keep saying physical because that's important. We don't even have a full reckoning of what the psychologies of all of this are, and that's a conversation for another day. But the physical events included some really dangerous stuff. Andrea, you look more closely at some of the specifics in that report and what these women were what they were experiencing.
Yeah, and just to get a little bit more detail in here, I encourage you to go to eppc.org and look into this more, because they followed or looked at the information for more than 865,000 women. And it's important. I want to go back real quick to something that you said, Jarrell, about the fact that over the past couple of years, the Biden administration had taken away the REMS that were put in place to protect women, to make sure that she is seeing a doctor and having an ultrasound, confirming viability. All of those pieces were stripped away and said, nope, you don't have to have that. In which case, it's putting more women at risk to go through the different infection, hemorrhaging, various adverse events that the hospitals did not then have to report on, because the Biden administration pulled it away and said, you only have to report an adverse event if it is death. And that completely
disregards. As if that's the only adverse event. Thank you. As if that's the only adverse event that, like, what was some of the things were like sepsis, right? Ectopic pregnancies. These things are okay. So they're not necessarily the death of the woman, but they certainly are things that could lead to the death of a woman. Like, this doesn't make sense to me that the FDA would not be interested, because that's exactly what the Biden administration said, to your point.
Absolutely. And to your point too, the many of these items could have been found simply if the woman was still under the care of a doctor and the REMS had not been removed, because an ectopic pregnancy would have been found in an ultrasound. The viability, because when you take away having that ultrasound with a medical professional confirming how far along the woman is, she's going based on how far along she thinks that she is, which the FDA only approves the abortion pill up to 10 weeks. We know from our abortion pill rescue network that many women have taken the abortion pill past that time, but she's under no care of a medical professional to watch and walk through that with her, with what they've stripped away of the REM for the past few years. So thankfully, they were able to go and find this information. We have an FDA and an administration that is now willing to look back at different studies or actually conduct studies as well, that should be able to give us more reliable information. Because the fact that you noted on the box of mifepristone, it says that there's less than a 0.5% chance of adverse side effects, and it's actually 11%. That's an issue. That's poor science. And we need to have the ability to review that and fix it.
Okay, so the way my mind's been turning this over, like, imagine a plane full of women, 100 women, and the FDA would say, well, you have 2 plane loads, 1 woman would be infected. But the truth is, you have 1 plane load, almost 11 women are infected. Like, can you imagine what that would look like if the FTA, right? Federal Transportation Administration, right? Oh, hey, a plane load of women is going to take off, and when it lands, 11 women will have to be seen by emergency paramedics for physical problems. Like, that plane would not fly. It would simply not be allowed off the ground by a sane administration. But the Biden administration, arguably before that, I mean, Andrew, you talked about the FDA changes, but those have happened in waves, right? There was a 2016 change, which took it from 7 weeks to 11 weeks. And then there was a 2021 change, which basically stripped pretty much everything after that, right? So really, there are 2 REMS changes that we are in question. And I mean, at the least, we hope that the FDA will look more closely and reinstate at least what was lost in 2021, if not the original ones that came from the original really acceptance of the abortion pill back in 2000 under the Clinton administration.
Yeah, and that's something that we are hopeful, because that's something that Secretary Kennedy has made note of, is that we are allowed to go back, and we should go back and review the studies that were already in place and revisit this. And so that even opens a door, if nothing else, to potentially get those REMS reinstated for the safety of women.
All right, let's land this plane, the good plane, right, that we're flying, not the one that the FDA is allowing right now with 100 women. But let's talk about some good, positive developments. We kind of teased this early on. We are seeing good things happening in the abortion pill rescue network, right? We teased this in January when we talked about this in the first couple of weeks, because we thought we were seeing some really positive stuff. We thought we were. Now we know we didn't. And we kind of started seeing them because, of all things, we had a month of December that was our best month ever. And by best, I mean it was one more start than our previous high, which was a start of 188 in May of 23, I think it was. And then we saw that we had, instead of 188, we hit 189. And we were like, yeah, that's a win. And we realized also, which we didn't kind of catch easily, was that November was 1 less than our number. And that's 2 months back to back. And then suddenly we saw something big happen in January, and we saw more than 200. And then I think there's actually a huge number, right? We had 238 occurred. So suddenly, not only were we hitting highs, but we were hitting record highs and starting to get into. So something interesting happened in November. And I think we were kind of what happened in November? Well, it was the election, of course, and it was the kind of the reorientation, frankly, of our big tech friends suddenly. And I recall seeing them all standing up at the dais at the inauguration, which was kind of curious. The censorship has not ended for APRN. We continue to be censored by Google as far as placing ads, but we are very, very cognizant that it seems like the suppression of our organic search and of things related to abortion pill has lessened. Now, whether it's gone or not is still another question. Whether it's gone on all the platforms is still a huge question, but at least it's lessened because we continue to see success. What were some of those numbers that we were looking at earlier, Andrea?
Yeah, it's really exciting because we were very mindful to not get overly excited early on because we wanted to be certain that a pattern was developed. And since January, every single month, we've had more than 200 starts. And that's been very exciting to the point that we can almost, we're still very conservative with how we say it, but we are approaching an average of 200 starts a month, which is huge. This is wonderful. We had been noticing that ever since September 2021, when we noticed a very direct suppression of abortion pill reversal organically showing up in search results. It been kind of, we're still getting called because women will find us no matter what. When they are in that desperate moment and they are looking for help, they will find abortion pill reversal. But since November, those numbers have just been going up, and we're well over 6,000 lives saved. Our statistics show us, and we're approaching even better numbers coming up. So that's very
right? Better, yeah.
Yes.
Another milestone. We're approaching it faster than we did last year. By my calculation, like so, over 200 a month is far better than where we were at, which is about 165 per month, which is about a 20% increase, which is excellent.
Yeah, just since November. And so it's been very exciting to know women are talking about it more. We're seeing it more easily on social media websites and people talking more readily. And then we actually, at our conference last week, I was talking with various marketing companies, and they are seeing that suppression lifted as well. Again, the censorship is still a little bit there. We're still pushing back against the big tech companies in regard to that. And we're working with our friends throughout the movement to help us push back against that. So hopefully we'll have some news to share in the coming months. But we are working to make sure that we have the ability to communicate the services that we provide and the care that we offer effectively through all big tech platforms and push back against the blatant censorship that some organizations such as Google or Yelp may be putting out there against pregnancy help organizations and abortion pill reversal.
Well, and the chilling of our free speech by, actors such as the Attorney General of the state of California, the Attorney General of the state of New York, the legislature of the state of Colorado and Vermont, all have acted negatively towards APR. And even then, we are seeing more and more women feeling pressured into that decision and then changing their mind after they've taken that first pill. And so as the numbers of abortions only get higher, now they're well over 1 million, and as the percentage of those abortions increase as far as chemical, we naturally should see an increase in those feeling the desire to change their path and to actually withdraw consent from an abortion they no longer want. And maybe because they never wanted it to begin with, and yet they felt that pressure either from a partner, their circumstances, or even the so-called medical professional that they encountered along the way to kind of pressure them. That, by the way, is kind of the number one thing that we've heard from some women who have successfully reversed their abortion. The number one thing we heard from them is they felt pressured. They felt like they were given no other options. And so as we see that continue, we should expect to see the number of women changing their mind continue to rise. So if you encounter or have an abortion pill rescue network hotline nurse in your sphere of influence, give them a hand, because their work has gotten more busy, more challenging, but also more rewarding, because we've been able to see more babies saved in the process. And we continue to look forward to that. So thank you all at the 100th day mark. We look forward to revisiting some of these topics more specifically, this one in particular with APRN, but also we look forward to seeing movement on the FDA portion, and we look forward to more information coming out from the data that's being analyzed, the real world data that's being analyzed. So thank you, ladies, for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you. So lots to watch coming up. So I would encourage our listeners to subscribe to our podcast, because we'll keep that coverage coming. So share with your friends as well who may be interested in how this administration is affecting the pregnancy help movement. And with that, we wish you all a wonderful and blessed rest of your day. And thanks for listening to this episode of the Pregnancy Help Podcast.